Welcome to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. I'm Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This show features questions from the Personality Hacker community that we answer in about 10 minutes. We've been using personality types in our coaching for years, and we'd love to answer your questions about personal growth through the lens of type. You can find out more about us at personalityhacker.com. Okay, now let's hear today's question.
Hey Joel and Antonia, my name is Aaron. I'm an INTP. Living in Anaheim, California right now. And my question is, do you guys have any ideas on how to conduct better Myers-Briggs personality tests? I ask because I guess my journey with Myers-Briggs started about a year ago, and yeah, I guess I never really got into Myers-Briggs because I took the test and I got my personality type, and it just never seemed to really fit me. It felt more like an astrological reading. Yeah, and one day something clicked and I realized I was an INTP, and I've been running from being an INTP my whole life in a sense. And yeah, I guess, I feel like that's a piece of my personality theory in a way, is that people are running from who they really are. And so when they answer these self-evaluation tests, they're not honest with themselves, because I've seen my friends take these tests and I've typed them opposite from what they got. So yeah, I'm just curious if you guys had any thoughts on how to get that to be better. Yeah.
Thanks, Aaron, for the question. I just want to ensure we create some clean thinking here. It's not a test. Even in the headline of this question, I went ahead and put test in because that's how you think about them. But it's actually an assessment. You're not passing a test. I want to make sure we all understand, as we talk about assessing our personalities, we're not testing anything. We're not trying to pass or fail something. Yeah. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
To make sure we understand that.
I think that's a good one. I'm probably not as clear on that as I should be. I probably use the word test a lot too.
Well, it's easy for promotion and messaging reasons because we all talk about it, casually that way. But I just want to create, it's not technically a test.
It isn't. It's not making sure that you're passing something or grading or whatever.
So then the question is, how do we create better tests, personality tests, even though we know assessments? How do we create better assessments? How do we measure type better? And to Aaron's point, he didn't have good descriptions or good understanding, and so he kind of avoided it. It felt like this weird system that was like, zodiac signs or something. And then all of a sudden something struck him. Oh, wait, there's something to this. I'm an INTP. Why was I avoiding this? There's a lot here.
Well, and I think that the most compelling part of the question is this idea that we're all trying to run away from our personality type.
Yes.
So we're like all the assessments, and I'll use assessment there, not test, but all the assessments are going to throw off the results if the person is answering based on the opposite of their preferences because they're trying to flee their preferences. Yeah. Right? And that does create some challenge. So I would say that, first of all, I don't think everybody's running away from their personality type, but I do think a segment of us are running away from our personality type. And that is usually when our type preferences are a mismatch for our context. And that could be, like you said, I've been running away from it my whole life. That tells me that your type preferences were a mismatch for your context growing up. There was something about how you showed up that was communicated to you as unacceptable, so that when you came to an assessment that asked you how you show up and your behavior, you stated behavior that it was not in alignment with your type preferences because that was not acceptable. And that does happen. It is one of the reasons why assessments can be inaccurate. Now, not all assessments are inaccurate, and we have said, are not so inaccurate as to be useless. We have talked about how even the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the MBTI, which is the gold standard of all of the assessments around Myers-Briggs, we have talked about how it has a 20% error rate. But one thing that we don't really mention is that that's an error rate getting 3 out of the 4 dichotomies correct. So if you're saying that it's inaccurate 20% of the time, but you only have 1 dichotomy off, that's actually still pretty good. So there are assessments out there that are pretty decent. That said, they can't account for what you just mentioned. They can't account for a person who is actually at war with the self. Yeah. And so how does one create an assessment that will take into account warring with the self? right? And I don't think there is one. I don't think that any sort of written or digital assessment is ever going to be able to overcome a person's not giving themselves permission to show up authentically.
Well, and also account for things like confusion. Like when you are asked a question on an assessment, you don't understand the question. There's no provision for that on an assessment. You have to answer it anyway, even if you don't understand what they're asking. Or forced choice. It's like, I don't do either of these things. And you have to kind of decide one, like you don't do either, you don't like either option, or you love both options. And you have to kind of pick the lesser of two evils, or I guess I like this 1% more than the other, but it doesn't feel accurate. It doesn't feel right. It feels forced, and it feels like a blunt instrument sometimes. Right. And so these are challenges, not just in, not just things you mentioned, but I think these are other considerations too in these assessments.
Yeah, you got it. So how does one account for that? I don't think an assessment ever will, but a person can. And not to turn this into a big infomercial or anything, but boy, do I have the program for you. So we teach a program called Profiler Training, and Profiler Training is designed to not proctor an assessment, but to learn a methodology of bringing a person into a conversation and building enough rapport with them so that as you interview them, as you ask them about, how do they show up in their life and what are the things that they like, and you're looking for their preferences through obviously their behavior. The methodology teaches you to go deeper, to ask deeper questions, more compelling questions, to not just look at what they're doing, but the why behind what they're doing, and to accurately interpret their answers and the whys behind what they're doing to match it up with type preferences. And so we feel like an assessment will never account for the things that you mentioned, but we do believe that profiling does account for that. Yeah. And in fact, it's a way of seeing a person maybe for the first time ever, so that when they feel fully seen, suddenly they give themselves permission to be all of those things that they might have been wrestling with their whole life. Yeah. That you are accepting them as they are, not as they are molding themselves to meet the world. Yeah. And so that's been our solution. That's been our answer, is to use assessments when appropriate and when one must, but to be able to profile when you have a sticky situation, when you have somebody who's not showing up like they probably would have had they had a life that was more designed or ergonomic for their type preferences, to account for somebody showing up, molded in a behavior, but still coming at it from a cognitive preference, to get to the cognition, not to just the behavior, and to get to the part of themselves that, that maybe they're at war with themselves, but they can't help being this anyway. Yeah. And that's what you're seeking in a profiling session.
This is the birthplace of the MBTI assessment. Remember, Carl Jung, he's an analyst. He's sitting in sessions with clients, one-on-one, having conversations, helping them discover the nuance of their inner space. He's helping them analyze their dreams, analyze their cognition, analyze what's going on for them. Out of this comes this idea in the book published 1921, Psychological Types, English translation 1923. We learn about the cognitive functions, and they were birthed out of a clinical use in therapy sessions to help someone, find basically the subjective nature of their mind, how they're cognitively using their mind. So what happens? A few decades later, World War II comes online, and all of a sudden, men in the United States and in the West are going off to fight in World War II. They're fighting the Nazis in World War II. And so all the women are left here in this country, and they have to go and flood into the factories and the manufacturing places because all the men are vacant. And so comes along the Myers-Briggs type indicator to help women discover what roles, what jobs, what aptitude do they have for placement, job placement, and other career advancements. So the Myers-Briggs it's a product of the industrialized West during the Second World War, honestly. And so it has to be done it's mass produced. It has to be kind of not a one size fits all, but it has to be scalable. And so you have to reduce the complexity, reduce the nuance, and reduce the fidelity in order to have a mass application. So 3 out of 4 letters on the 4-letter code, that's good. That's good for an environment like that when you're trying to place people during World War II. But if you're trying to make a real change in your life, or you're trying to get along better with your spouse or partner, or understand your kids better, that's going to break down really quick. And to your point, Aaron, there are better ways to make these changes in our lives, way more subjective, nuanced, human ways to make these changes.
Yeah. I'm sorry I was going to interrupt you. I was going to also say, I mean, it wasn't just manufacturing. It was also things like, code breaking for the government.
Yeah, spy, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there was a lot of different things. But, and by the way, thank goodness there was a scalability to it, because it allowed the work of Carl Jung, even though he was a little salty about typology systems, it allowed the work of Carl Jung to get mass distributed.
He didn't like the MBTI very well.
No, well, he didn't like the system. He thought it was going to oversimplify things. He thought it was going to go off the rails of analysis, and it kind of did a little bit. It became, like you mentioned, Joel, a career placement tool or instrument, and so it did leave the point of origin to some extent. And at the same time, it also allowed for so many people to be aware of the model that we can now go back to the point of origin and understand its application and uses in multiple different arenas. So I'm not salty. I'm glad that it went down the way it did. It just means that that finding the roots of that conversation of the psyche to psyche experience, that's how we account for the more quote unquote blunt instrument element that is scalable, and thank goodness it was, but it's how we account for, for the personal growth and personal development aspect of the system.
Yeah. And if you're more interested in what Antonia talked about, profiler training, you can find out more information at profilertraining.com. If it's an enrollment period, we'd love to have you in the next class, the next cohort, because we have these trainings launching at all different times. So go check that out. Thank you, Aaron, for the question. You can ask your own question about personality types or personal growth. Visit personalityhacker.com/questions. We also have programs designed to help you with your personal growth through the lens of personality types. Again, visit personalityhacker.com and find the program that's made just for you. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. We'll talk with you on the next episode. Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships, but what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality. And then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity. Because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first. Because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.